Thank you, Morgan. Good morning and welcome to this joint service of First Parish Congregational Church and the United Church of Christ at North Gorham. This is the second combined service that we've done this summer. A couple of weeks ago, Reverend Christine Dyke from First Parish led the service, and today it's my turn. So you probably noticed from the bulletin that we're following the format, the order of worship that we typically do at North Gorham. So those of you who are members of First Parish, it'll be a little different from what you've been doing. In some ways, probably a little more traditional. Although we do have a couple of unique little pieces that our congregation includes that we will also include this morning. Most of you are familiar faces to me, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm David Farrington. I'm the pastor at the North Gorham Church, but for about 20 years, I was a member at First Parish and then served for a little while as the associate minister for the two congregations as part of our partnership arrangement. And then a couple of years ago, we made some changes to the partnership, and my pastoral work has been pretty exclusively at North Gorham. But we have continued to keep this connection between our two congregations. These services are a part of that, as well as a lot of mission projects and committee work that we share together as we each seek to fulfill our common mission in our community. There are announcements that are printed in the bulletin. They are primarily for North Gorham. The First Parish announcements went out in the usual email earlier this week. There is one additional announcement that didn't make it into the email, but that is inserted into the program this morning, and that's regarding next Sunday. After Sunday's service here, there will be a gathering to honor those folks connected to First Parish who passed away in the first couple of years of the pandemic. And of course, that meant people were not able to really gather and remember and honor them as we would customarily do. So there will be a time of remembrance. The names of those folks are printed in that insert, and that will again be immediately following next Sunday's service. Are there any other announcements that anyone would like to share or highlight? Yes, Judy.
Good morning. Oh, okay. I gotta manage this too. Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me? Okay. So hopefully you saw the announcement in the blast, but just in case you didn't, out. Okay. Thank you. The mission committee. Closer. Okay. Sorry. I don't want to be shouting at you. Mission committee is once again doing its backpack project, and I have lists if you would like to take one to get the items for one of the backpacks, or take two labels for two backpacks if you want. Or there's other things that are for the class in general in a second list. We need to have these, or we'd like to have them by Wednesday, August 17th, which is 10 days from now. So see me after church if you're interested. Thank you.
Any other announcements to be shared? Well, we've all been probably keeping an eye on the weather forecast. I know I have been looking ahead to today and knowing that it was going to be hot, I chose a particular call to worship. So hear these words now as we prepare ourselves to worship God. Jesus says, "Come, all who are thirsty. Come, all who are weak. Taste the living water that I shall give. Dip your hands in the stream. Refresh body and soul. Drink from it. Depend on it. For this water will never run dry." We have a special guest accompanist with us today. Scott Balcom is filling in for Cecile DeRoche Kane, who many of you know, who is our usual accompanist, but Scott has very graciously agreed. Actually, he very graciously agreed to do this, not realizing the conditions that his service would entail. So thank you, Scott, for being here. Our first hymn is "God of Our Life." It is on one of the inserts in your bulletin. Please be seated. I didn't see him back there when we were doing announcements, but I do see Ryan Jara in the back. And if you didn't see the results from yesterday's Beach to Beacon race, Ryan had quite a race. He was 5th among all main finishers. And still made it to church the next day. This morning's scripture comes from the epistle, the first epistle of Peter, chapter 3, verses 13 to 18. I'll be reading from the Good News translation. "Who will harm you if you are eager to do what is good? But even if you should suffer for doing what is right, how happy you are. Do not be afraid of anyone and do not worry. But have reverence for Christ in your hearts and honor him as Lord. Be ready at all times to answer anyone who asks you to explain the hope you have in you, but do it with gentleness and respect. Keep your conscience clear so that when you are insulted, those who speak evil of your good conduct as followers of Christ will become ashamed of what they say. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if this should be God's will, than for doing evil. For Christ died for sins once and for all, a good man on behalf of sinners, in order to lead you to God. He was put to death physically, but made alive spiritually. Here ends the reading. Thank you again. In our time this morning, I'm going to refer a couple of times to Reverend David Butler, who, as most of you know, died this past June 1st, and who many of you knew very well. David was the lead minister at First Parish for 18 years. And for most of that time, through our partnership agreement, was also one of the ministers serving North Gorham. For me, David was a mentor who became a close friend. But my purpose this morning is not to offer a eulogy or pay tribute to him. The time for that will be at his memorial service, which is coming up in about 3 weeks. But I do want to share 2 conversations that I had with David at different times and offer some reflections about what I learned and what I continue to learn from those conversations. The first is a conversation that happened about 3.5 years ago. Now, those of you from North Gorham heard this story a couple months ago because I shared it in a sermon. So I apologize for the repetition. I promise you I'm not just repeating the same sermon another time. But this conversation happened at a time when David had been retired from First Parish for a couple of years, but he had not yet taken the part-time ministry position with the Days Ferry Congregational Church. So he and Maureen were still living in Gorham, and he and I used to meet fairly often over at the pre-renovated Sebago for some conversation and a couple of beers. And our conversations would cover the widest range of topics: politics and theology and history and literature and sports and just about everything. But one conversation has really stood out in my memory. And at that point, 3.5 years ago, I'd been serving as the associate minister for the 2 congregations for just about 6 months. And that meant that for the first time, I was having to prepare and deliver a sermon every Sunday. And I was discovering just how challenging it is to come up with something to say that is insightful and hopefully inspiring every 7 days. And so I asked David, how did you do this for 30 years? He kind of smiled and he said, I think the secret is learning how to look at your life. There's material for a dozen sermons in the things that happen to you every single day. The things you see, the people you talk to. Yesterday, I was running late for an appointment and I jumped in my car and out of the blue, it wouldn't start. There's a sermon in that. This morning, a plant that I thought I had killed blossomed. There's a sermon in that. The dog got off his leash and took off, so I went traipsing through the woods, could not find him anywhere, only to discover he was back on the path waiting for me. There's a sermon in that. And then he said, this conversation that we're having right now, there's a sermon in this. So David, if you're listening, I actually have managed to get 2 sermons out of it. Now that conversation stuck with me because it's been immensely helpful in my approach to doing what I'm doing every week. But I've also learned that this isn't just a practical tip for preachers who need to come up with something to say every Sunday. When you develop the habit of watching and listening every day for moments of deep insight and glimpses of eternal truth, this can actually become a kind of spiritual practice. It orients you towards seeing life through a certain lens. It gives you an ever-growing appreciation for the presence of the sacred within the ordinary. And when I shared this story recently at North Gorham, I ended by inviting members of the congregation to consciously look at life through that lens, to open your eyes to those daily incidents and episodes that can make you think, there's a sermon in that. We've even had a couple of brave people stand up on a Sunday morning and share the sermons that they saw by telling their story and sharing some reflections about the deeper truth that their moment revealed. Seeing our lives as offering these glimpses of eternal truths, as brimming with little revelations of God's presence. This is an essential component of our faith. The many little stories that make up our days are the material out of which our lives are constructed. And what we make of these little stories shapes our perception of ourselves, our attitude toward others, and our relationship to God. The meanings that we find in our daily episodes, whether they are adventures or misadventures, will often depend on the lens through which we look at them. If we can open ourselves every day to seeing grace and beauty, then we can understand and experience our lives as a gift. Learning to look for opportunities to say, there's a sermon in that, reminds us that God's presence is found in even the most mundane parts of life. And in a very real sense, this is the deep wisdom at the heart of our tradition's doctrine of the incarnation. What we celebrate every Christmas when we sing about the birth of the Christ child is our belief that God is not a distant being out there somewhere looking down on creation. The God we believe in enters into our very life, and we experience the divine as inextricably entwined with our world and with everything in it. But there's a second conversation I had with David that I also want to share. This one was more recent, back in April of this year. As some of you are aware, it is almost exactly a year ago, in early August 2021, that David was diagnosed with advanced esophageal cancer. He immediately began chemotherapy and was in treatment through the fall, winter, and into the spring. During that time, he and I talked on the phone fairly frequently. And even as the chemo was taking a terrible toll on his body, he and Maureen tried to maintain some kind of optimism that the treatment would be effective and would give him a little more time. But then in early April, I got a call. It was David, and he told me that the doctors had had some scans done to assess how things were going. And it was clear from the scans that not only had the therapy failed to shrink the tumor, but the cancer had spread to his lungs. And so at that point, it was evident that further treatment would only continue to put his body through hell without any real chance of success. And so they began to talk and plan for palliative care and hospice. As I listened on the phone and tried to process this awful news, I did what we all usually do in a situation like that. And I asked, is there anything that I can do to help? Now, earlier in the year, the North Gorham Church had actually given David the gift of a Sunday off on a week following a treatment by sending me to preach at Days Ferry. And so I offered to do the same thing, to offer him some respite. But it was April, and Easter was less than 2 weeks away. And so he thanked me, but he declined the offer. He told me, this is going to be my last Easter, and I really want to get it right. Now, Easter obviously is a big deal in any church. It's one of our two major holidays when we know the church is going to be full, and we literally pull out all the stops and have extra special music and lots of flowers and the whole deal. But I knew that that wasn't really what he meant. He wasn't talking about Easter as a church event. I was thinking about Easter as the one big story in the Christian tradition. We have all these little stories, these daily encounters with the sacred that I said earlier are an essential component of our faith. But something that's essential isn't necessarily sufficient. And the truth is, for all the revelations of the divine that life offers, life sometimes also brings us realities that don't reveal God's loving presence to us. Pain, suffering, loss, cruelty, violence, injustice. When we experience these, we can't just look for the deeper meaning and find the lesson that's embedded in what's happening. Sometimes there is no deeper meaning to be found, no sense to be made out of a tragedy. And when we come face to face with one of these harsh realities, all those little stories are glimpses of grace suddenly seem grossly inadequate. That's when only our one big story can give us hope. The author of this morning's text from 1 Peter tells the readers to be ready at all times to answer anyone who asks you to explain the hope you have in you. Nobody asks another person to explain why they have hope unless that person is in a situation that appears to be hopeless. In the face of the cruel but inevitable facts of pain and suffering and death, where is their hope? When brutal reality makes all our little stories seem irrelevant and useless, where do we find faith? In the Christian tradition, the story that offers hope when we are beyond hope, the one big story, is the story of resurrection. That's what David was talking about. And he said he wanted to get it right on Easter. So on his last Easter, he opened the service at Days Ferry with these words. Resurrection means that the story that began with a life lived for others, a life lived with a passion for the God of love and peace, with a man who preached good news to the poor and lifted up the downtrodden, with an execution on a cross, with a death and tears and a tomb. Resurrection means that it is not over, but lives on. Resurrection means that even generations of defeat have not stopped the power of love. Resurrection means that all the forces of greed and power have not overcome the spirit of compassion. Beyond all hope, the living Spirit of Christ lives and grows in us. This hope beyond hope that he was talking about, this conviction that in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, love is the ultimate and eternal truth. This is our one big story. As we read in 1 Peter, Christ died for sins once and for all, a good man on behalf of sinners in order to lead you to God. He was put to death physically, but made alive spiritually. In Jesus crucified, we see a symbol of the worst the world can do. The epitome of the kind of injustice and undeserved suffering that can cause us to despair. But then, in the midst of the sorrow and sense of abandonment, comes the resurrection, this astonishing claim, this bold affirmation that the God who is love itself will never leave us, but instead embraces us and empowers us to continue to live with hope. The one big story is why we can choose to base our lives on the values that Jesus embodied: acceptance and compassion, justice and forgiveness, even when life seems to render those values naive, foolish, and futile. Where the crucifixion would suggest the utter failure of Jesus' vision, the resurrection insists that the boundless love that is the essence of that vision is far stronger and more enduring, even than death. There's a long-standing literary tradition of portraying a group on a long, difficult journey, telling each other stories along the way to sustain their spirits. Think of the Canterbury Tales, or the Decameron, or Watership Down if you count stories told by rabbits. I do. And we too are travelers on a journey of faith. And we have these two types of stories we tell, and those stories sustain us. There are the many little stories we tell that capture those incidents when we experience eternity in a moment, and we see the divine revealed in the ordinary stuff of our world. And then in those times when that world comes crashing down, when God seems suddenly absent and reality seems to reveal only senseless sorrow, we have the one big story. This audacious, impossible truth, offering us hope beyond hope, urging us on, assuring us that nothing can ever truly separate us from God's everlasting love. Our scripture tells us, be ready to answer anyone who asks you to explain the hope you have in you. Our stories are our answer. So let us continue to discover and share our many little stories. And in the moments when those are not enough, let us hear again our one big story and allow it to renew our hope and give us the courage to live by faith every day. Amen. Our two congregations have a mission in our community and beyond. There are many ways that we can support that mission, one of which is through our financial contributions. There is a place available. If you have a contribution this morning and haven't dropped it off already, you could do that at the close of the service. And in that way, help further the cause of our congregations.
Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise God, all creatures here below. Praise God for all that love has done. Creator, Christ, and Spirit one. Amen.
You may be seated. If anyone did not get a chance to pick up some bread for the communion, you're welcome to go and help yourself at this point. But before we share in communion together, we have what is a kind of new tradition for us at North Gorham, and that is affirming our open and affirming covenant. As many of you know, in the United Church of Christ, congregations have an invitation to declare themselves to be an open and affirming congregation. And there is a process that involves study and dialogue, and ultimately a vote of the congregation to decide on taking this designation. And the meaning of this is that it's a commitment from the congregation to truly welcome all people to the full life and participation in the congregation. And particularly, it's an openness to folks who are traditionally, and unfortunately in far too many churches, still unwelcome. And that is particularly members of the LGBTQ plus community. Now, First Parish went through that process close to 20 years ago. North Gorham began the process back in 2019. Well, really the process began long before that in an informal way, but the formal process began in 2019. And then with the pandemic, we had to kind of put it on the back burner because these were the kinds of conversations that are really important to have face to face. But then earlier this year, we resumed our process, and in May of this year, by unanimous vote of the congregation, we adopted our own open and affirming covenant. And so we officially became open and affirming congregation number 1,763. And so since taking that vote, we have begun the practice on Communion Sundays of reading our covenant aloud together, because what communion represents, among other things, is an open invitation to all to come and share in this meal together. And so this is a fitting time for us to affirm the commitment that we've made. And so while most of you are not members at North Gorham, you're welcome to join us in reading this. If you want to substitute First Parish as the name of the church, you're welcome to do that as well. But it is the blue insert in the bulletin. And so now I invite all of you to join in affirming this covenant. Since our founding, the United Church of Christ at North Gorham has always been a warm and welcoming church, open to anyone who wishes to join us as we seek to embody the values of Christ in our community. This means that we are a congregation that affirms and celebrates people of every age, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity. We welcome people, whatever their economic circumstances, or political persuasion, and regardless of their mental, emotional, or physical challenges. Whatever labels or categories might be used to distinguish people from one another, we believe wholeheartedly that every individual is equally a child of God, worthy of participating in the full life and ministry of this church. We mean that invitation seriously. We know that this custom of sharing in communion is one of the most longstanding traditions in Christianity. Unfortunately, there have been times when it has been an exclusive practice, when folks have been told you can't. We believe that is against the spirit of what Christ did in instituting this and what the church has always been called to do in continuing the tradition. And so this communion table is open to all to join together. We take the elements individually, but we also do it as a group, as a family. Our Gospels tell us that on the night that Jesus was to be betrayed and arrested, he first shared a meal with his disciples. And at the table, he took a loaf of bread, he gave thanks, and he broke it, and he gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Following his example, we now share the bread. And in the same way, he took wine and poured it out and gave thanks and said to them, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for many. As often as you drink it, do so in remembrance of me." Ministering to you in his name and following his example, we now share the cup. the blood of Christ shed for all. This time I invite you all to join in a spirit of prayer. God, we thank you for the opportunity to share together in this tradition, to remember the events in Jesus' life and the example he left of unselfish and sacrificial love. May we also be reminded that we make his presence in this sacrament real by recognizing that we are called to be the body of Christ, to be his lifeblood in our time and place. We are grateful this morning for the opportunity to be together again, to remind ourselves that we're not complete on our own. We're here because we know we need the guiding light of your Spirit and the encouragement of our fellow pilgrims who share this journey with us. We give thanks for the many joys in our lives, for the good times we can spend with friends and family, for the knowledge we have that there are those who care for us. We lift up all those close to us who are dealing with difficult days. May they know your presence even in their pain. And may we find ways to bring your grace and comfort to them. Our God, in this time of so much turmoil and confusion, anxiety and resentment, may our congregations be places that speak the simple truth with gentleness and respect. Places that seek understanding and reconciliation in this time of division and conflict. Strengthen us and help us live out our belief that nothing is more real, more true, or more enduring than your divine love. We close by praying together the prayer that Jesus taught. Our God, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation. Deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Our closing hymn is Just a Closer Walk with Thee. You'll find it on one of the inserts.
I am weak, but thou art strong.
close the service with another little tradition from North Gorham. After I give the spoken benediction, we will close as we always do with a brief sung benediction and then a recessional that was written by Warren Gilman, who was a longtime stalwart of the North Gorham Church and North Gorham community. And so, although we don't have candles on the altar to extinguish and carry out the light, we will do so symbolically through our sung benediction and closing. And so now, go and open your eyes and ears to the many little stories that reveal God's presence. And when that presence seems impossible to find, open your heart to the one big story. Amen.